Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Last First Date Radio, featuring interviews with experts in dating, relating, and mating in midlife. And now, here's your host, Sandy Weiner.
Hello, this is episode number 389, How to De-escalate Arguments and Manage Triggers, with my return guests, Paige and Don Marrs. Hi, everybody. This is Sandy Weiner, and welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late for love and that a woman of value naturally attracts the respect and rewards that she deserves in life and love. Every week I bring you a tip on how to become that woman of value. This week's tip is don't be a people pleaser. This is a big one. So many of us have grown up trying to be liked at all costs, and we end up becoming people pleasers, and we really squish the personality that we have in order to be accepted by other people. And I remember I had a client who grew up in a home that she thought was really healthy and happy, and she couldn't understand why she attracted really unkind, selfish men. And we did some coaching and looked at her family blueprint, and it turns out that even though she had a loving home, it was a home where her mother was ill, and she had to really suppress who she was in order to not make too much noise and get good grades so you don't upset your mother. And she ended up always suppressing who she was for decades until we started working together, and now she's like a full-out, really amazing person who is attracting all kinds of good stuff into her life. So my challenge for you is, if you notice that you are doing something that's out of alignment with who you are just to please somebody else, just take a pause and pivot to something that really would be more in alignment with who you are. Before I bring on my guests, I want to remind everybody that I have a wonderful free Facebook group called Your Last First Date. So if you want positive guidance to find lasting love and you're over 40 and you're a woman, join us at Your Last First Date on Facebook. And now for my guests, my return guests, Paige Marrs and Don Marrs. They have been happily married for over 30 years, and they have worked together since the day they joined their lives. They co-authored 2 how-to memoirs. Both teach through story. Their first one is Executive in Passage, When Life Lets You Know It's Time to Change. Let that knowing lead you, which chronicles Don's passionate struggle to leave behind the ethical conflicts in his career in advertising and find work that would be truly meaningful to him. The couple's second book is called Grabbing Lightning, The Messy Quest for an Extraordinary Love, and it reveals their messy, intimate journey to a love greater than either of them knew to reach for. Paige and Don have offered their relationship program, The Love Conversation, for more than a decade. They help couples and singles resolve their challenges and experience the love they yearn for instead. And they return to Last First Date Radio today to talk about how to de-escalate arguments and manage triggers. Welcome back to the show.
Thank
Sandy.
you
For inviting us.
We're real happy to be back.
Yeah, it was fun last
so
time.
happy to have you. We were having a really great conversation before we went on air, but we were just saying how we wish we could have recorded that. But let's get right into it, because this topic is just so important. And a lot of times when people argue, they get so triggered that they think, oh, my God, we can't be together. And what I said before we started is, like, it feels like I'm going to die, that amygdala gets triggered and that fight or flight response kicks in, and often we will run away from a relationship. So what is your take on that?
Well, let me start with that, Sandy. We definitely think that the relationship is just, you should stay with it even though you're arguing. As a matter of fact, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for if we were partying because we were arguing. When we got together, we were so blissfully in love. It was just extraordinary. And then a couple, 2, 3, 4 weeks into it, I I must have said something, and Paige said something, and I said something back, and suddenly we were at war, and it was the most painful, awful thing that either one of us felt. And so we think that arguments are just part of the quality of being, and that they really give you an opportunity to find out more about the other person, and as we'll probably talk about later, it gives you an opportunity to go even deeper into your relationship. They're very helpful.
And if I would add capital I, capital if you know how to work big, large, big. If you learn how to be in them and to respond to them, and also in part how to de-escalate them, so that basically the shorthand would be so that the love wins instead of whatever fear got triggered. Because if you keep letting the fear being triggered win, it really does lead to what we see, and I'm sure you see this too, is that either people split ultimately, or they stay together in less than a relationship that's much less than what they are capable of, or they kind of live these siloed lives where they get together at times, but they really have a lot of separation between them instead of the juicy togetherness that fosters personal growth in both and this beautiful coupling.
Yeah, that's a really important piece. So both are important, and I was married with that separation, so I know what that feels like. It's a very alone feeling when you can't resolve conflict. In our case, there was a lot of walking away from conflict on my husband's part, and I would try to resolve something, and he would just literally walk away from me. And I didn't understand why that hurt so much until I started reading Gottman's work and understanding the Four Horsemen of how people argue and the worst ways to argue in a relationship. So that's part of the issue. Yeah, but I also didn't really understand how to argue either. I mean, I would get hurt, I would shut down, and I would stay and stay and stay and stay. And so, but it's just so important. And, when somebody, so that just to let people know what I'm talking about with the Four Horsemen, the four worst ways to argue, according to the Gottman Institute, are to be defensive, to stonewall, which means to completely ignore a person, walk away, put the paper up while somebody's talking to you, criticism, and contempt. So those are ways of basically, I'm right, you're wrong. There is no room for connection here. And what we're talking about is how to go deeper into the relationship through argument. So can you speak to that?
Yes, I'd like to go into that first. As I started to talk about was our early part of the relationship, and I draw on our relationship because it's been really quite an extraordinary experience for both of us. In the early days, you probably can recognize a guy like this, I was extremely defensive. And I don't know where that came from. I don't know what happened in my childhood, but I came that way, and so it was fairly easy for us to tip into an argument if Paige said something that seemed to trigger me. So at the beginning, we had an argument, but again, it was, as we've indicated earlier, it was so painful. We got back together, which in order to get back together, Paige actually was really the clever one here, because she realized that a couple of things. One is that the argument needed to have an intelligent conversation, which requires two people, and that if I was going to be defensive, she was going to have to find a way to introduce the discussion without sounding like it's an attack. So I would imagine if two people are arguing and one person tries to start a discussion with an attack, like, why are you ignoring me? It's no wonder that the argument continues. So she was able to realize that, to approach me in a way that I wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah. And it wasn't just about not approaching, basically, in what you described, Sandy, of him walking away, leaving. I'm sure he did, I'm sure at some point you were physically in the same place where you could try to talk again. But it's about, it's certainly you can't start back with an attack, or if you do, that just triggers everything and even can make it worse. But the other thing is you also can't walk on eggshells. You can't be tiptoeing around either, or again, you can, but you won't like the result. And I was so triggered by what would happen. So we would have some little misunderstanding, and I think that's one of the things that's so frustrating is, it can be about the tiniest thing. I remember we were in a group we were leading recently, and this woman, we were talking about this stuff, and she said, oh, God, I can't even begin. I don't even want to admit what it is that triggers us. And I said, oh, come on, and she did, and she said, well, we have this glass dining room table, and he always leaves it messy. He it gets dirty, and I'm cleaning it up 3 times a day, and it's like driving them bonkers. And that's so typical to hear these things that we think shouldn't bother us, but they do for whatever reason. And so in our case, it was something would happen, and I would try to talk about it. I would try to keep going in the conversation or come back to it, and he would snap with this really sharp tone about not wanting to talk, or he'd walk away, or some form of that, like, I'm not talking about this, said in whatever words. And I would have one of two reactions. I would be either so stunned by it that I couldn't talk, and now, I was just floored, or I'd be angry and frustrated, and I would try to keep talking, both of which, of course, backfired. And when Don said graciously that I, figured out how to do that, is we had this thing before we got together. We both had recognized through, our own inner work and the studying we'd done, the love we felt, the deep depth of pristine love was really a reflection of something larger, what we would call a transcendent love or an eternal love. So we had the mindset that the love itself was abiding and there if we could get back to it, and also understood that the fear reactions were also transitory if we let them be, that they didn't have to rule our lives. So I tried just basically I experimented. I tried a gazillion different approaches. And I did. I was going, okay, let me try this. I was like, okay, he doesn't want to talk at the end of the day because he's busy and tired. Okay, I'll try in the morning. I was like, no, I want to go to work. And I remember this whole experimental phase, and I went, and he was, he tried to respond well, but we were pretty not who we were. 33 plus years ago, we weren't who we are now. And I remember the thing that I stumbled on that really worked for us, and that I think has worked for a lot of people we've worked with, is that I would come back to him after doing a bunch of inner work on my own, and I would say something like, look, I'm struggling with something, and I need your help, and I need to talk about it. And I would sometimes even say, and before you say, you're up for talking about it, let me warn you up front that when I describe my view of what was going on, you're going to look like the villain. Are you sure you can talk about this? And I did it playfully. I did it, and it, boy, I tell you, it turned things around.
It was a very, very funny experience in the sense that I had this. I think I mentioned it the last time we were together. That I had this kind of epiphany, out of body experience of that everything was love, and that the earth is love, I was love, everyone's love, there's nothing not love. And once you know the truth in that sense, that stays with you as a reality. And I had created a company with that as its basis, but then I started this relationship, and somehow I never connected love with relationship. Now that sounds stupid, but there was a sense of I know how to be loving to a client, and I know how to be loving to Paige, whom I love, but these arguments sort of got out of hand before I could do anything about them, and so it got exempt somehow. That what was so wonderful about those early years was that Paige was relationally oriented, so that we were able to transmute all of my poor learning about relationships through this incredible crucible of this woman's love.
Aww.
And she just kept finding ways of whatever and I think this is one of the keys of this, whether you're arguing with your child, or you're arguing with your husband or your uncle, or somebody at work or something, there's always fear at the bottom of it. So that was part of part of the epiphany that I had, was that the root of every argument is fear, a fear of something. For me, it was fear that she found something critical in me and I didn't, that I'm not lovable, or fear that, oh my gosh, we made a mistake. Are we going to, is this relationship durable? But there are we got fear after fear after fear, and that's what gets provoked. So once I realized that all I learned in business and in this great experience I had was applicable to a relationship, I thought, wow, this is amazing that if we keep defaulting to love is much stronger than a fear emotion, because it's a human experience of a transcendent reality. So going into it, then all we need to do is overwhelm fear with the ability to love. Of course, then the strategy is, how do you get both people in a loving mood again? That's
and work out the real issues, because you can't just otherwise there are real issues that have to be discussed.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when one partner de-escalates, it really helps the other partner tremendously, which is what you were talking about. That Paige comes back and she's trying to, find a way to get in sideways, upside down, backwards, and until you finally find. Well, I can relate, because I tried here for 23 years to, figure out a way to get through to my husband. I thought if I just say it differently and at a different time, I tried. But there were other things that weren't present that couldn't make the relationship work. And so a couple of things that I just want to highlight here, just, making love the primary focus, that love is more important than fear, and knowing the value of the relationship and keeping that front and center is so important, because we can easily lose focus when we get into fear mode. So I love all of that, and I also love that, Paige, you were playful and also, stated your intention and asked for help, which is also tapping into his masculinity and his, all the smart ways to get through to him.
It was. And that's true. And it may not be that way with every couple. I think the point is that you look for, ultimately what you're looking for is, how do I approach this person who I love, who I'm really pissed at, and in a way that makes us both feel safe enough to enter an intimate, vulnerable conversation about something that was very hurtful for both of us. And so, and it might be the entry line might be really different for different people. This one, I think, happens. I get feedback that one works for a lot of people, so that's great. But the point isn't the line. The point is doing the inner work enough, the self reflection and the self transformation. We even call it a self intervention, enough so that in my case, if I say with that story, I couldn't get to that line right away. Even after I knew it to do that, I couldn't say it in a way that you just heard me say it until I spent a little time on my own and I paid attention to what was happening in my body and the knot in my stomach and my feeling angry or hurt and that damn inner rant that went on in my head about what went wrong and it was critical and he shouldn't have said that and why does he keep doing all that stuff but doing that, if you know in the back of your head, well, I know that's a fear fest, and I know I'm going to come back to love here if I stay with it, and then that noticing leads to calming, which we now know why from the neurosciences and what all the hormones are. And basically I looked, it wasn't so much what I said, I looked for in myself, this was my cue, somewhere along the line I shifted from being mad to feeling sad. And I was like, I don't want to be like, I don't like this. And I also noticed it was mad to sad, and it was also from my mind feeling very jumbled to being clear. And once I was sad and somewhat clear-minded, or let's say not so jumble-minded, then I felt like I could think clearly enough to make a wise choice about what to do, whether I approached him then or later, or whether I started with that line, or whether I just went in and said, I think we probably said this last time because we use it a lot, whether I said, I'm sorry for my part, and we just hug and table it and do it. It's really about the real key. People want to know how to de-escalate an argument. The real question should be, how do you de-escalate yourself? Because you got to do that first. Yeah. Somebody has to do that first, as you said.
I want to play off what you've just said, if you don't mind, that Paige got herself back to love in some fashion so that she could approach me from a place of wholeness within inside of herself. But part of it was it's difficult to approach somebody in love if they're angry. So I think what was so skillful was that she disarmed my fear. She opened her discussion with, I'm sorry for my part, but after that it was, this is not about you. This is about something going on inside of me. And right away, I was released from my anger, my fear, because she said it was about her. So then I was if she would cast me in a role of being kind and helpful to the woman I love.
Which you are by nature.
Which I am by nature.
Yeah.
And so I could listen. And, the hormones, of course, are going to be drumming through the body for hours afterwards, but in a much, much subdued state. And I think part of what comes out of this is that it's really important to somehow get the love first before she says, this is my discussion. This is where it's going to hurt you a little bit, because she already had me in a loving state back then because we hugged and whatever. So it gets a little tricky, but if it's a simple equation of love is stronger than the fear you got, and you'll have to find out what is the fear that other person had and what's the fear I had, and then you're more able to go back into a loving state and address them in a way that's not going to further provoke them.
So I'm also hearing a lot of curiosity about self and about the other to really get to that place of love.
Yeah, I think that's an astute observation, and when you, which I did in my doctoral work, is looking at the neurobiology of fear and compared to the neurobiology of love or connection, or what's generally called social engagement, is you see that the state of fear, we all know, is there's nothing curious about it, and appropriately so. If you're about to be eaten by a tiger, you don't have to wonder whether the tiger is a male or a female. You just have to get out of there. You don't have to be curious. So in a fear state, curiosity isn't there, but curiosity is very present when we're in a more what we would think of as a whole self state, when you're back to your access to being able to, you have a clear mind and a warm heart, and what one of the things that goes with it, I forget whether it's 11 or 15, there are qualities of that state, but one of them is curiosity and the urge to inquire and to learn. It's also where our intuition sits too. So if one of the things you think of, if you think of fear, the state of fear and the state of love, or the state of neurobiologically of being safe versus not safe, they're on like a teeter-totter. So when fear is high, love and openness and clear-mindedness is low, and vice versa. So that's why it's so important to really pay attention to what's going on inside of you, in each of us, before we can continue into the engagement, because otherwise it's like we call, you said the amygdala, we talk about the lizard brain, and we go, otherwise it's two lizards talking instead of two humans. It's like it really doesn't work very well. And you just shouldn't do it. Just stop that.
Yeah, really. I don't want to be thought of as a lizard.
And although it might be so better
present.
Than a reptile.
Right.
That's why I use lizard instead of reptilian.
Right. No, lizards are cute. But I in the dating world, because we were immersed in this swipe left, swipe right, barely get to know each other, making huge assumptions and judgments, and there's so many triggers. And I recently had an experience with a guy who wanted to meet me and gave me two options to meet, and I told him one was better than the other, and then he said, no, I can't meet that day, I'm working. And I was like, I got a little curious. Oh, I thought you said that was one of the options. And I said, so, okay, the other option is a little tighter for me, and I gave him the time frame, and he said, oh, that's not going to work for me. I'm looking for a woman who is really flexible and can match my lifestyle, isn't super busy. I was like, whoa, and then he just disappeared. He completely wrote me off.
Yeah.
And I took a breath and went like, wow, that guy was easily triggered. I'm glad we didn't meet for coffee.
Yeah.
Thankfully up front.
Yeah, that was a kind alert for you to.
Yeah, it was. And he has a psychology background, by the way.
Interesting.
Anyway, it happens all the time, though. And if you can't manage your triggers, you think, what did I do? Oh my God. Yeah. I'm at fault. I should have been more flexible. Whatever. And it's so let's go back to just the definition of triggers, which, how do we get those triggers? Where do they come from, and how do we, so just the definition first, and then we can talk a little bit more about how do we de-escalate those triggers.
How do we de-escalate them? Okay, let me go with that one. We're hardwired to be triggered, as you know. So I think that's one of the most important things to understand, is that our whole survival system, which I won't go into because it takes too long, and I think your audience probably understands, but that fight, flight, freeze system that's so important to keep our physical safety intact is on purpose wired, designed to be extremely fast and reactive, so that it can help us basically not become dead. And and so in a sense you could say we're designed with hair triggers on purpose and thankfully. So fundamentally the body that we walk around in has that. So, and if you don't have it, it's a really bad problem, so you want it. Then and this was when I was studying this stuff, I was in our backyard and heard this kind of a funny sound, and I looked down. There were 4 of us out there, Don and I and 2 friends, And I thought the sprinklers were going to go off, and instead, within very close striking range, probably about 4 feet, was the head of a very large coiled rattlesnake. And it was really bad. And I immediately leapt backwards and kind of over this chair and spun around and didn't fall down. And I am the most unathletic person. Well, maybe not the most, but I'm extremely unathletic. And there's no way you could get me to do something like that. But I did it, and so that was my fear system being triggered in the best way, right? My little friend, my lizard brain, saved me from its cousin, the rattlesnake. So yay! And but one part of the wiring is that in order for it to be that fast and effective, it's also wired to not be able to tell the difference between the sound of the rattling of the rattler and Don kind of huffing at or snarling at something I said, or being cranky at something I said, or whatever, which he doesn't. I mean, I got to tell you, that never happens anymore. This is all we're talking about, the first maybe 3 to 5 years before we got it worked out. But anyway, because I don't want him to sound like he's still that way, because he's not, and he's incredibly receptive, and he had a lot to do with it. But anyway, but the whole point is that trigger system, the keep me safe system, is also, in order to work, it can't tell the difference between the rattlesnake and him snapping at me just a little bit. And so your whole system goes into the same reaction. And I have found that 2 things are the most important and create a shortcut for helping people learn to manage their triggers. And it's not by knowing their emotional source. That isn't one of them. Not that that's not valuable, but it's 2 things. It's one is knowing the neurobiology of it, like we just talked about, and it's also then taking the time to see how that fear system drives what you might call a conversation gone bad. And so you'd look at how does the trigger make the tone in your voice come across in a way that triggers the other person more rather than makes them feel safe? Or how does your timing do that? So something about the combination, and this is actually what my doctoral research was about, so I'm going to cut it short because I could talk for 3 hours, is that basically the combination of understanding that that's in your neurobiology, the trigger, and that it manifests in the way we speak to one another, in our conversations, that tends to give people the key to knowing to go, okay, I can let my neurobiology calm down. I'm almost always overreacting in a relationship when the problem is a relationship thing rather than a rattlesnake. And then if I look at how I'm behaving, whether I'm raising my voice or speaking like really obsequiously and nice, being little or people pleasing, like you mentioned. People pleasing is that's a manifestation of fear. That's your lizard brain trying to avoid being criticized or disappointing somebody or something. It's still a fear fest. So those, we find that those, and you see many what we call masks of fear happening in relationships and in the way we speak to one another or don't speak to one another. And those 2 insights for us have been the most important thing to know about triggers.
Fascinating. So the neurobiology and understanding how it manifests in us, and then learning how to say that again?
It's the neurobiology, and it's understanding how that fear reaction, how the trigger reaction becomes enacted, if I can say, how we enact or do or behave that triggeredness in our conversations with one another. Because our conversations are where almost everything goes wrong. I mean, even how often do you hear somebody say, it's not what you said or what you did, it's how you said it.
Right.
Right. And so it's our ability to communicate with one another in our conversations that matters. And when you can step back and see how your lizard brain is driving the conversation, light bulbs go off and you go, oh my God, I really didn't have to do that. I had another choice. So you have power and leverage And that we have found seeing the fear reaction in yourself, in your body, and seeing it how it gets behaved in a conversation gone bad with your beloved gives you what would you call it? It's a shortcut into shifting it, and that takes less time than spending a lot of time or enormous effort in understanding where the trigger came from, and was it my mom or my dad or a past life? Again, a lot of that stuff is, I totally think that that's valuable, but you can clean up a lot by just those two things we just said, focusing on those two areas.
Yeah, I love that. And the why is never as important as the how and how it manifests and how we can deal with it, because I always love to know where things come from just to understand how we got to where we are. And then what, right?
Exactly.
It's sort of putting the pieces of the puzzle together, but often people don't give you tools to then deal with, okay, so we're here, and now what?
What do you do? Yeah, exactly. We're heavy fans of tools.
One of the other things in
Me too.
one of the other things in the neurosciences is that in case you get the feeling that fear is the boss in the body, that there's a lot more going on neurologically that supports love, relationship, compassion, understanding, that mindfulness, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that we have a lot of support for, our normal ideals of caring about the other person and embracing other people. And, when the fires were going on out here in California, what was an amazing thing is how everybody ran to the aid of everybody else. It was just an astonishing thing. Right in the middle of a country that is so separated right now, it was like compassion. We really can default to compassion and love, but sometimes we have to be reminded that that's most important for us.
Yeah. Basically, we're more, even though the fear is a very strong reaction, we are more wired to love and connect than we are to be reactive. One is just louder than the other.
Yeah, it's really true, and you see it like here in New York after 9/11, how people came together. Any crisis, really, people come together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think if people can really work on the fears, and because there's so many layers underneath it, and they can really see what the emotions are and get connected to themselves, to being calm, to being able to really see the issue without being in fear. And then what's the most important thing? It's like when I always said when it came to public speaking and I was petrified, my mission was more important than my fear. The love for what I did overcame my fear. And that's important. I think in anything we do.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what in relationships too, and what kept me trying to figure out how to manage, how to get us into a better conversation, and also for Don equally his willingness to go there. I was just happened to be a little more proactive about it at the end, but he was a very willing participant. He was not resistant to that.
I was sold on love. When we met, but I confused it with business rather than with relationship. I had to start all over again.
Yeah, which we
it's
do.
Less
but
vulnerable in business too.
Exactly. There's so much more at stake, and we get so much more triggered in relationship because it starts tapping into basically a core fear is I'm not lovable. And that really gets poked at in a relationship when things are going sideways.
We mentioned earlier on that that you can use your glitches to go deeper, and here you are in this moment where you've been disarmed, both of you, and there's this upwelling of renewed love again, and willingness to kind of work out whatever it was, and there's a moment of great intimacy in those times where exposing yourself in ways totally disarmed, in ways you may have never done before. And what happens in a relationship with two people, if they continue to disarm the fear and go deeper and deeper into the love, you really access that transcendent quality of love. You're developing your relationship along a line of a resource that is unlimited. Whereas if you were doing it in a fearful way, it's a very limited, narrow, crunchy, negative development.
Well, and what you just said there, to me, it reminds me of when, Sandy, when you said that your love of your mission and your commitment to do that work was bigger than your fear. I thought that's true for us too. And what Don just described about the potential of relationship that very few people get to experience, but that we not only experience, but we know in many evidence-based groundings what that is and how to do it. It's so important for people that we're doing this work and going out of our way out of our comfort zone, and we're both really introverted and would just rather stay home and see a few clients than do this.
Yeah.
We step outside of that and fears start to get triggered. So, but it is that thing of, and that's why we wrote that book, Grabbing Lightning. It's like that's intimate and vulnerable stuff. But we care more about having more love on the planet and less fear than we care about triggering our own fears. So we're all in that same boat of trying to get behind what we care about despite our fear.
I love it. Well, this has been an amazing show, and I love the conversation with you guys. You're doing so much good in the world. Let everybody know how they can find your book, because this is a much deeper conversation, and people can go deeper with your website and your book.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for the question. First, the book is called Grabbing Lightning, The Messy Quest for an Extraordinary Love. It's The Messy Quest for an Extraordinary Love. And so if you just look that up, or our last name is with 2 R's, Marrs, on Amazon. It's also on Barnes & Noble and 8 or something other online booksellers. So it's pretty easy to find that way. And by the way, the messiness that's in that title, The Messy Quest for an Extraordinary Love, that's what we're talking about today, is the messy quest for an extraordinary love. So, and as you said, as you were reading our little bio, it's a love story. It's a story. It reads fast, but it does illuminate people, and in that way, it's kind of been dubbed a how-to memoir by a reviewer. So that's how to find the book. And then we're at the program that we use is called The Love Conversation, or that we teach. And so our website is theloveconversation.com. It's not The Love Connection. It's The Love Conversation, because love gets created and destroyed in conversations. So it's called The Love Conversation. And same thing on Facebook. If you want to join us there, we're new to Facebook, so it's kind of messy for us. But, hey, come on over and say hi.
Join the mess.
Yeah,
well, thank you
really
so
messy.
much. Yeah, well, we're going to get cut off in 2 minutes, so I just wanted to thank you again, and thank everybody for listening today. I hope that you have some great takeaways, as I do every time I talk to Paige and Don. And if you love our show, please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and we hope you go on your last first date very soon. Have a great day.